Welcome to Church Experience Online. We're so happy you joined us today. As you watch this teaching video, if you have any questions or need help getting connected, please don't hesitate to reach out by phone or email. Also, our website is the best place to go if you would like to access helpful Growth Step resources, join a serving team, connect in a life group, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially by giving online. At the end of this teaching video, you'll hear an original Church Experience worship song. We hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned today. Thanks again for joining us at Church Experience Online.
You're either in it, or you're going through it, or you're about to go through it. And I think that's life, right? And we're in it, and we're trying to get through it, trying to get to the other side, or we just finished going through it, or maybe we don't even know it, and we're about to go through it. Well, you know, when you're in it, and you're going through it, God has a lot of help for you. And He wants to help you get through it, but you got to let Him. And I think today, as we think about whatever it is that's going on in our lives, and what God's doing, what He's changing, what He's trying to call out in us, where He's having us step up to another level, where He's causing us to step out and serve and love others. Whatever it is that we're going through, God wants to help. He wants to be a part of it. But again, you have to let Him. You have to allow Him to do His work in us. We have this amazing story in the Bible, in the book of Jonah, about a guy who God called to go through it, but he didn't want to go through it. And today and next week, we're going to look at this story. It's a story I think there's so much for us to learn. Jonah was not unlike us in that God gave him something hard to do, and really he just didn't want to do it. And we're going to pick up the story in Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." So Nineveh was located in modern-day Iraq, near the town of Mosul, and it was a town that was known for its idolatry, its sin. It was a city that was known for its war atrocity against those who were war captives, and it was a horrible place. And so when God tapped Jonah and He said, "Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh and tell them how I'm not happy with how they're living," that's a hard assignment. And Nineveh is a place that God was not pleased with. He wasn't happy. Things were not going well. It was not an easy assignment. And how do you respond when God gives you an assignment? He gives you a challenge, something He wants to maybe do in your life, in your heart, and it's not an easy thing. How do you respond? We're going to learn a lot from Jonah and his response to what God was doing in his life, and we're going to learn a lot from what God did in his story. And you and I have some similarities with Jonah. And I think a lesson that we can learn, if you have a weekly and you want to pull it down and pull it out and write some lessons down, the first lesson I'd say is that the path of least resistance may not lead to God's purpose for your life. And for Jonah, the easiest route in his life did not take him to where God wanted him to go. In fact, the path of least resistance led him away from where God wanted him to go. And I think where Jonah is a lot like us is you're going to see Jonah had a hard time with this calling, this thing that God wanted to do in him and through him. You know, Jonah, like us, tends to ask the question, what do I want to do? You know, when you wake up every day, I think your pattern, if you're like most people, is to say, what do I feel like doing today? What do I want to do? And that's human nature. We we tend to ask that question, what do I feel like doing? What do I want to do? Now, the problem is that question gets us into all kinds of problems. What do I want to do? Because what you want to do, what you feel like doing, is not always what's best. And the easiest path is not always the path that leads you where you need to go. See, God is a dealer sometimes in difficult assignments. But you might have to say yes to a difficult assignment to get to your destiny. And if you want to get to the destiny God has for you, the plan God has for you, it might mean traveling through some difficult days. And that's not easy. And Nineveh was not an easy calling for Jonah. I have a friend in our life group. I love our life groups. We've got groups all throughout the area now that are meeting and studying the Bible together, learning together, sharing life together. And we were in this group, and one of the things I love about life groups is when someone shares something, it makes you think, oh man, I'm so glad I'm not the only one. And I had that moment when my friend was describing his childhood. He was very adventurous, and he got himself into all kinds of situations and circumstances, and he was making us laugh, telling us about all these stories. And a couple of stories that he shared with me, it kind of related to what we're talking about today. He said, there was this building that was going on near their neighborhood where he grew up. And there was a new subdivision that they were putting in, and they were laying the groundwork, and they were digging out the foundations and these cement basements for these homes. And he said there was one cement home that, the cement basement that I went over to explore in. He's just a young kid, and he jumps down into this cement basement foundation that had been poured, and he's exploring around, playing in it. But then he realizes as a young boy, these high walls that surround this cement basement. The house has not been built on, it's just this cement hole, basically. He realized that he jumped in there, and as a little boy, he could not climb out. And he was stuck in this hole, and there's nothing he could do to get out, and so he waited, and finally a contractor came along and helped him out. And then the part of the story that was terrifying to think about a young child doing, but you can totally picture this, can't you? He sees this drain pipe that they were putting in. And this drain pipe was being put underground, and it was not completely covered, and part of it was exposed, and so he decided to get in there and climb into this underground pipe and see how far he could go. And there's no one else around, right? It's a developing neighborhood that they're building out, and so he's got the whole place to explore this evening, and so he's crawling through this underground pipe, and he gets so far into it as it narrows that it squeezes on the sides of his shoulders, and he's actually stuck in this underground pipe. And he's telling this story, and I'm like, you could have died in that pipe, man. Obviously you didn't. You lived to tell about it, but you could have died. And he's like, yeah, I got to the point where I literally, he goes, I was wiggling, and I could not get out. I was stuck. And I was wiggling, trying to get out of this. I'm thinking, that is unbelievable. Do not leave your children unsupervised, right? And when he's telling me this story, I'm thinking, man, doesn't that sound like us? Man, we get ourselves into all kinds of these situations, or life brings these situations, and we're just trying to get out, and we're fighting to get through it, but we feel like things are closing in on us, and we can't get anywhere. And it's not always easy. In fact, sometimes it's really hard to get through it. Sometimes, though, I think that we blame the hard in getting through life on God or on others, when the responsibility lies on ourselves. We're the one that climbed into that thing, and we're the one that kept pushing as things were getting harder. We just kept pushing ahead because that's what we wanted to do. And then we get stuck, and we're wiggling our way trying to get through it, and we're praying and saying, God, please help me. And God's thinking, well, I was trying to help you by telling you not to go in there, and you went in there anyway. And, I think some of the hard paths in life, not always, but a lot of times it can be our own doing. And the huge learning in that is for us to realize when we fall, when we experience failure and hardship, is to learn from it so that you don't have to repeat it. Say, God, what is it that you want to teach me in this time? As I'm going through it, what is it that you want me to learn? God, what lesson is there in this for me? I'm always asking, what can I learn? How can I grow and mature in this situation? Because see, if you go through something bad, if you go through something hard, especially if it was your own doing, and you just survive it, well, that's good, you got through it. But what's better is to, as you go through it, to learn something so that you can get better and hopefully not have to experience that all over again. God, though, sometimes does deal out difficult callings, difficult asks of people. And he asked Jonah to go to Nineveh. So it was not Jonah's sin, it was the sin of that community, of the city of Nineveh, that was drawing Jonah into a difficult situation. You know, the book of Nahum describes the city of Nineveh and how bad it was. It says, "Woe to the city of blood, full of lies." So it's talking about the city of Nineveh. "Full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, and glittering spears. Many casualties, piles of dead bodies without number. People stumbling over the corpses." Imagine a city so evil where people are walking the streets, tripping over dead bodies. Verse 4, "All because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring the mistress of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft." This is a horrible, sinful city, and God's not pleased. God is attention, as does your sin and mine. See, God notices. He takes note of when there's sin. And thankfully, he's a patient and loving and compassionate God. But he takes notice, and he's aware of it. And he doesn't want it to remain. Because if you're living in sin in your life in some way, you're missing out on God's potential for you. You're falling short of what God actually has for you and what he wants to do in your life, and you're not experiencing the life that he has for you, the full life he has, and so his heart breaks over that. And so he goes and he taps Jonah, and he says, "Jonah, I need you to go to Nineveh because Nineveh is filled with sin. And there's a lot of brokenness there, and there's a lot of pain there, and there's a lot of violence there because people are not living for me. And so I need you to go, and it's a hard assignment for Jonah. Definitely not the path of least resistance." See, God's purpose does not always align with our pleasure. And if you're expecting God's purpose to always align with your pleasure in the short run, then you'll sometimes miss God's path for you. Now, God's path will always take you to the place that leads to the most pleasure in the end. That's why we say the best is yet to come, because we believe that in eternity, as you look back, regardless of what pain you went through as you follow God or what challenges you had, in the end, you will be most satisfied as you are satisfied in him, in his presence for all of eternity, because you followed him. Think about Jesus. Jesus went through a path that was filled with pain. In those years of ministry that we know about, recorded in the Bible, led him eventually to execution. And then because he was executed, he eventually was resurrected. And we just celebrated that recently with Easter and the resurrection of Jesus. And we sing about it now thousands of years later all around the planet. It's like the most incredible event that's ever happened in human history, his death on the cross. But it was made possible because he was willing to take the path that included pain. You know, maybe your life will not be defined so much by your successes, but by your suffering. You know, we want it to be by success. We want to live this amazing, great life that's filled with pleasure and opportunity, and that's what we want to mark our life. In fact, we want our legacy that trails behind us to be filled with all these wins in our life. But what if it's that God wants to redeem some losses? What about the story where God wants to take someone that's come out of hardship or lack of or need or problems or brokenness, and he wants to use that story to impact other people? What if that's his path for you? Would you follow him? See, Jesus' path was not an easy path, a path to the cross, a path to the end of what you would hope for in this life. You know, he died. It wasn't that happily ever after kind of an ending, so it would appear. But in the end, it was the most incredible victory that's ever marked this planet. See, God's path for you is not always going to be easy, but when you follow it, it'll take you where you want to go. And so what if your story, what if your life is going to be marked by some of the hard things you go through? Well, Jonah, that's exactly what God had called him into. There's something he wanted to do in his life, and it involved going to Nineveh. It involved preaching a really difficult message to a people that were not going to be receptive to it. What if that's God's plan for us? What if that's God's plan for your life? See, God's purpose does not always include traveling down the easiest road. It was Pastor Joby Martin who said, God is for you, but he's not about you. He's for you, but it's not all about you. It's not all about your pleasure. They say that God is more interested in perfecting us spiritually than pampering us physically. And a lot of us want to be pampered. We want to pull up into God's day spa and be like, God, just hook me up and just make me feel comfortable. And I just want to kind of cruise through life. And God's like, that's not why I created you. That's not what I have for you. I actually have more for you. But you have to step out and you have to trust me. You have to trust me as you make decisions that are not easy decisions. You know, in Philippians chapter 2, verse 21, it says, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. And the reason why God's church does not advance even more and more people don't experience life in Christ and our world has not changed even more than it is currently, the reason why there's still poverty and brokenness and violence and all that, in part is because we think of ourselves. See, God, there's so much that God could do through the person who makes them available, who surrenders their life to him and says, God, I'm all in. Whatever you want to do through me, I'm all yours. But when it comes to sacrifice, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to taking a hard road, we ask this question, what's in it for me? What do I want to do? What's most comfortable for me? Instead of, God, what do you want? See, here's the question we all have to grab a hold of today. When I'm making decisions, when I'm at the fork in the road, God, what do you want me to do? Not what do I want to do. Jonah here in Jonah chapter 1, going back to this story, he unfortunately makes the wrong decision. Verse 3 says, Jonah ran away from the Lord and he headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and he sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. You know, I've heard this story my entire life. From a young child, this is the story of Jonah. You know, you hear it. And to me, I grew up around it. It's familiar to me. I've heard it so many times. I've read it so many times. But something leaped off the page at me when I was reading it this time and studying for this message that I never really noticed before. It says that Jonah, that he paid this fare when he was boarding this boat to run from God. And I noticed this and I thought, man, you know what? This is really like foreshadowing what is about to happen in his life as he runs from God. And it's really a hint of what happens for all of us when we run from God's plan in our life. You know, he's calling you up into something. He's calling something out of you. He's wanting to grow you, change you. And what happens is it ends up that we run from that because it's not easy. And here's what I learned is that it costs you. See, I never noticed in the story that when Jonah was boarding the boat, it says that he paid a fare. He paid a fare. He took some of his resources and he paid to run from God. And you know what? When you run from God, you'll pay for it every time. When you run from God's plan in your life, when God's doing something and he's leaning in and you're pushing back, it always costs you. And it would cost Jonah so much more than the fare that he paid, but that was the first sign to him. And maybe sometimes God in his kindness allows us to experience a little bit of consequence when we start to step off his path. Maybe we start to fade back, we start to fade away from God, we start to drift into sin, into apathy, into spiritual laziness, and we kind of distance ourselves from God, and we start to go through it. We start to get stuck in some things. Things start to get difficult, and maybe that's the kindness of God saying, hey, you know this is going to cost you, right? You know, and right now what you're paying, right now that little that you're pulling out to run from me is actually just foreshadowing it's going to get a lot worse. And you think, well, I'm just going to push through this and it's going to get better. But maybe sometimes the through it that you think you're going through is actually about to get a lot worse because you're running from God. And Jonah here, he's being exacted a cost, and the cost is going to grow the further that he gets from God's plan in his life. Jonah didn't want to obey God. And you know, we need to do certain things. We're called to do certain things, but we want to do other things. And that conflict brings so many problems and so much pain into our lives. So I want to do this, you know, and I have a reason. You always have a reason. My mentor told me one time, you know, we always have reasons for doing what we do, and our reasons explain us, but they don't excuse us. And you will always have a reason for not obeying God in your life. This is why I can't do this. This is why I can't step up into this. This is why I can't follow through in this. This is why I can't whatever. And we always will have a reason. And those reasons we call excuses for not doing what we should do. You know, there's this thing right now where people will call into a workplace that they don't work at, that they've never worked at, usually a large company, and they'll call in sick. Just for fun. It's a prank. And they'll call in sick, and they'll say, hey, I can't make it today for some crazy reason. just to get a reaction. And they don't actually work there, but just for fun, I want to show you an example of this. I think it's pretty engaging. Check it out.
This is Jordan calling. I just started there last week, and it's like really nice and stuff, and some of the boys are going out fishing tomorrow, so I'm not going to be able to make it in for my shift. I was just wondering if I could take like a sick day or something.
I'm sorry. First of all, your first name was?
Jordan.
Jordan?
Yep.
And you had just started last week?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be an unapproved absence. You're too new, I believe, for a sick day. And
well, I'm not actually sick. I just need a day off to go fishing because it's so nice.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but it's not a good legitimate reason to miss your shift from work. So it's going to be unapproved, and just so that you're aware, as far as our policy goes, that's probably a discipline.
Well, what would be a good excuse? Like, could you just write something down for me?
No, I can't. I'm an assistant manager, and I could be the one that has to hold you accountable for it. So no.
You're a manager. Oh.
Yeah, not a good person to ask for an excuse.
So I can't go fishing?
No, you can't go fishing.
It's just so nice out.
Yeah, that's one of the responsibilities
of the job. You can't do me one just this
No,
week?
I'm sorry, I can't. And just, I mean, it doesn't look very good for you.
It probably won't be busy though.
Jordan?
Yeah.
You're not looking very good to me right now. Not at all.
Well, I look good. I just don't sound good. I'm confused. Are we FaceTime? Can you see me?
It's not a very good first impression.
Oh, I've met you before. I didn't know you were a manager. You don't remember me?
No, I might have met you at the interview process, but I mean, we do a lot of them, so I don't remember every face, no. So I'm going to tell you at this point, if you don't show up for your shift, it is an automatic unapproved, which will be a first level written discipline. And within your first 90 days, that is definitely not a good thing.
How many of those do I get?
You're missing the point of what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
Okay, so you need to be here for your shift.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Excuses, man. We love to play with our excuses. We love to throw them out, man. We all have them. And, that's a little lighthearted example. But, man, can't you see yourself in that? God, come on. It's really, I mean, can you just do me one, God? Can you give me a little hook up in here, and let's just not worry about this time? How about, can you give this a hard assignment to somebody else? God, can you give me a pass here? We have a lot of ways that we like to get out of and excuse ourselves out of whatever it is that God's wanting to do in our lives. And when we do that, though, when we get out of what God really wants to do in our life, we miss out on what God wants to put in us. So when we get out of it, we miss out on what he wants to put in. Let me give you an example of this. This week we have a couple really cool things happening with Church Experience. So we have on Thursday night baptism. And it's going to be awesome. We have some people that are being baptized, and, their lives have been changed at some point, and they're saying, hey, Jesus has changed my life, and I want to publicly acknowledge that. And baptism is a really cool step in your faith journey. I mean, every time I've been able to baptize hundreds of people, and every time they come up out of the water, you can just tell it was a significant spiritual step forward for that person. Sometimes with tears in their eyes, and they're pumping their fists, and they're so excited about what God's doing. And it's always so amazing. And I've baptized a lot of you in this room. It's so neat to see when people take that step. And it's a public step. It's a step that emboldens them. And think about their sins being washed away, about how when they went under the water, they identified with Christ, just like Christ when Jesus died, he was buried. And so I'm dying to who I used to be without Jesus. And when you come up out of the water, it's like I've been resurrected with Christ. I'm living this new life in him. It's a very symbolic act of what has already happened inside us. It's something that God wants us to do. It's a get to, not a God to for us. It's this get to. I get to do this. It's so amazing. It's a great step of faith. And if you've never been immersed underwater and had that experience, and if you've never, as an adult, and some people as children, nothing wrong with that. It's great. They had some water sprinkled on them and were baptized in that way. But I'm telling you, like to get to experience that, if you haven't, every time I've seen someone do that, they've always said, man, I'm so glad I did that. That was such a great step. So we got a bunch of people who were baptizing this Thursday down at Clearwater Beach. 7 o'clock, right next to the pier. I hope you'll come join us. It's going to be amazing. Going to watch a sunset one of the best beaches around, and see God's creation, but more importantly than that, see how God's recreated people in their hearts and they're baptized. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. But I wanted to share that with you, but here's my point. Over all the people that I baptized and that we've seen baptized, do you know that there's a lot more who should have been baptized, who made a commitment to Christ, who maybe thought about being baptized, thought about taking that step, but they didn't? You ever think about that? Every time people make commitments to anything in life, there's always that group that woulda, shoulda, coulda. You know, right? The people that thought about it, that felt God prompting them, but for whatever reason, they made it an excuse and they didn't. I'm too busy. I got a lot going on. I don't know if I feel like it. I mean, what are people going to think of me? And what if so-and-so, you know, what? And all these excuses. But that's what they are. They're just excuses, and they've held them back. And I wonder how many of those people who, and let's use baptism as an example, but it could be any spiritual step, how many of those people didn't grow in their faith? They instead started fading back. You know, maybe they attended church for a while, but then at some point, you know, they never really took the step that God was asking of them. They said no, and they kind of, their heart got a little callous. They built some walls between them and God, and maybe they just kind of got distant over time because they knew what they needed to do, but they didn't do it inside, and they kind of knew that they cowered away from that, or they excused themselves out of it, and they didn't grow. They didn't take a step, and then eventually they eventually just kind of fell out of their relationship with God, and then they missed out on all that God wanted to do. And that's just an example, but I wonder how many times God is moving in us, and he's like Jonah, I need you to go here to the city, and we don't do it. You know, here's another example. This week, so we have a lot going on this week. There's some cool things happening. Wednesday night, we have this event we call First Class. We've had hundreds of people go through it, and it's been amazing. We teach them about our history, our mission, our vision, how to get connected into a life group or a serving team, and how to be a part of church experience and this movement that God's doing here, and it's a great experience. We do the free food and childcare and all that. It's a great night. But what's most important out of that is people build relationships. And sometimes they'll take on a responsibility in ministry, or they'll get connected in some way with other people, and they start to grow spiritually. They move to the edge of their seat. Instead of just being a part of the crowd, they become a part of God's church, and eventually maybe a part of the committed and the core, and they take a next step. But I wonder how many people thought about doing something like that. This is open to everyone. Hey, come Wednesday, come hang out with us. 6 to 8 o'clock, we'll be there. But you know what? A lot of people think about it. I should do that. I could do that, but they never do. And I got a busy schedule. I got a busy week. I'll get it next time, and they don't. And then what happens over time is they start to fade out. They never built relationships. They never put roots down, this seed of faith, maybe if they're a new believer or trying to get some momentum in their spiritual life. They're excited, but they never grow. They never take the step of getting connected and move. And so they don't move forward. They start to shrink back. And eventually they fade out in their commitment to Christ. You know, all of us will have those times where God prompts us. And those are just two examples, but God will say, hey, I want you to reach out to this neighbor, this friend, this coworker, and I want you to share with them, serve them, help them. Or, you know, here's an opportunity for you to grow in your relationship with God. I want you to pray more. I want you to get in my word and read my word more. I want you to, and we know God's asking something of us, like he did with Jonah. Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh. And it's not always going to be easy. If you're expecting God just to always ask you to the easy, you're gonna think he's asking you to the wrong things, because a lot of times God calls you into the hard, to change a pattern, to renew something inside of you, to begin something new in your life. And God's blessing, here's the lesson in your notes. God's blessing, it comes on the other side of obedience. God's blessing comes on the other side of obedience. It was Pastor Chuck Swindoll who said, one of the marks of spiritual maturity is the quiet confidence that God is in control, without the need to understand why he does what he does. You know, we don't always have to understand why he's calling us into something, but when we say yes, we experience his blessings that come from following and being obedient. And if God's speaking to you right now, and you know he's wanting to do something in your life, but you don't step into it, you miss out on the blessing that comes after obedience. We tend to want the blessing and then obedience, like, God, if you bless me, then I'll follow you and I'll give my life to you. God, if you'll just do this for me, then I'll do this for you. See, that would be a transactional relationship. God's not interested in that. Let's see if humans connect with each other. You do this for me, I'll do this for you. See, God began, and he put his hand out first, and he gave of his son. God so loved the world, he gave. He's a giver. He initiated by giving. He didn't ask something from you, he did something for you, and he gave of everything. But then he makes asks of you, and he said, I'm going to ask you to trust me. I'm going to ask you to surrender to me. I'm going to ask you to follow me. I'm going to ask you to take my love and share it with others. And when he makes those asks of us and he's doing things in us, we can get we can get so focused on the why. Well, why, God? How, God? Where, when? And God's like, I just want you to be obedient. Mother Teresa, I love her response. She said, when God asks me to do something, I always say yes, and then I ask, what is it? You know, it's like signing a blank contract. It's like, God, you fill in the terms. I'm all in. It's not, let me look at the terms. You know, that's what we do and makes sense in human interactions. We look at all the terms. All right, let me see if I agree to this and this and this. And if this all works out in my benefit, then I'm in. But I try to think of some of the excuses that we tend to have, and I wrote a few of these down. I think we ask things like, how will this benefit me? Will this make me uncomfortable? These are excuses really in the form of questions. When you're making a decision that you ask, we say, will it cost me? Will this put me in an unfamiliar environment? Will this make me feel awkward? Will this cause other people to think a certain way about me? And I'll just ask you after the question to you, what questions do you tend to ask in moments of decision that might lead you away from God's plan for your life? Is it possible that by asking our questions, sometimes we're delaying obedience? Maybe the only question we should ask when it comes to decision-making and following God is, God, what do you want me to do? God, what is it that you want? And once we know what that is, and sometimes you have to ask other questions to discern that, and sometimes you have to ask advisors, and you have to get in God's word and ask that question. But once you know, and I think a lot of times we know, and our questions are not trying to figure out what God wants to do, our questions are excuses to get out of what we know we need to do. And God's like, Jonah, I need you to go to Nineveh. Well, God, why would you want me to go to Nineveh? That's kind of a crazy place. Like, God, like that's a horrible. And if I go tell them you're not happy with them and their sin, God, do you know what they're going to do to me? God, do you know what this is going to cost me? God, do you know the problems with this plan? And God's like, I don't want you to worry about that. I just want you to worry about one thing. What is it I'm asking you to do? So I'm going to ask you, what is it that God's asking you to do in your life? You have to pray that and ask that every day. When you wake up, God, what do you want me to do with this day? I have a calendar. I have a list of things I need to do, responsibilities. But God, what is it that you want me to do? And if you'll ask that and then you'll obey whatever it is that God asks you to do, your life will change. Your life will never be the same. It'll be amazing. And you know what? Sometimes God asks you to be the answer to your own prayer. Some of you are trying to get through it and you're stuck and you're praying and you're saying, God, help. But he's actually waiting on you. You're waiting on him, but he's waiting on you. Let me give you an example. Earlier this year, for the first time, we did like a 90-day trust test, a tithe challenge. We're a new church, and, we have all these aspirations, and there's a practical side of it. We'd love to get out of high school and get into our own space one day, and we're working towards that. And so we challenge people to give and support what God's doing. But even more importantly than that, we talked about how it's a spiritual decision, and it's a way that God matures and grows us, and that's usually one of the last things that we let go of is our finances. And so we challenge people for 90 days, and we're still in this. We're in that 90-day period. We challenge people, hey, during that 90 days, test God. He says to test him in Malachi, so test him in this and see if he's not faithful to take care of all your needs and honor him with your money and tithe and give to God. And so I was going into that. I had no idea. Between our different services, I had no idea if we'd have 100 families or individuals that would sign up for that or like 10 people. I had no idea. And so I prayed for 40. I said, God, would you give us like 40 families or individuals or people who would say, I'm in. I'm going to take a step in this direction. And we passed out the cards that day during the services and got them back. And I'm sitting at home and looking through the cards, and it was so cool. Some of the notes that people left on there, the comments they made, it was just so cool to see what God's doing in our church, in this new church, and these new commitments in people's lives. And I counted them up, and there was exactly 39. And I was like, on the one hand, like super excited. I'm like, God, that's great. What an answer to prayer, and we were praying for that. And then I was like, well, it's a little short. So it wasn't quite what I had prayed for. And then I felt this inside of me, this kind of, this tug inside that was certainly God saying, well, Brandon, it's because you're number 40. And I was like, well, God, I've been tithing for years in my life. Something my parents taught me when I was a kid. And I've done that. Whatever jobs I've had, I've just tried to honor you and give back to you that first tenth. And I've done that. And so we were challenging people to do it. God, I'm already there. In fact, we give above and beyond that because we want to. And we believe in what God's doing. And I felt like I was saying, but you need to lead from the front. You need to sacrifice more. If you're a leader, you set the example. And so we filled out a card. We talked about it and thought through it and stepped up, and we were number 40. And I was praying for something. I was waiting on God to do something. I was praying for you, and I was praying for myself. And God was wanting to do something new in my life. He was wanting to push me, and I'm so grateful that I listened and stepped out, and it's been awesome to see what God's doing. And you know what? God will sometimes allow you to be the answer to your own prayer. Some of you are praying for a marriage or a relationship, and you're praying for them, and you know what? God's waiting on you to change. Come on, let's get real. You're praying for God to do something in that friendship and that relationship, and you're saying, man, God, if you could just get a hold of them, and God's saying, hold on. If you would lead, if you would serve, if you would humble yourself, then that would get their attention. That would change things. Some of you are saying, well, God, if you would just fix my situation, if you would just fix this problem, and God's saying the real problem is in here. See, a lot of times we're praying for God to do something and we're waiting on God, and he's saying, listen, what I'm waiting on is for you. And Jonah knew exactly what God wanted to do. And it's like, he probably, like a lot of people, thought, what's wrong with those people? Well, that city's filled with sin and violence and brokenness. God, why can't you just fix those people? Have you ever prayed a prayer like that? What's wrong with that person? What's wrong with that situation, with that community, that country, that world? Well, God, what's wrong with that picture? And God is saying, well, the solution to Nineveh is, Jonah, you go there and tell them about me. And Jonah's like, well, I didn't picture that I was the solution to the problem, that God, you were going to use me. I was thinking maybe somebody else could be like the person. I don't want to do that. And so Jonah didn't like the plan that God had, even though he would have agreed with the outcome. You know, the challenge for us is to how we think about obedience to God. When we got into our house this fall, it'll be 3 years we've lived there, and we moved in and we wanted some drapes on the front window, and Jennifer found some, but they weren't long enough, and so she got some things and she sewed it together and fixed it all up, made it look nice, and we were so happy to hang these, and my job was just to put the bar above that these drapes would hang on, and so I screwed it into the wall, and I was so happy it hung, and it looked nice, and it was balanced, and just happy that, okay, it's up. Well, my kids have this thing when I come home, sometimes they see Dad out the window pulling in the driveway, and they want to go hide from me, and it's like this great game. And so they're like, hey, guys, Dad's home. And so the boys are running, and they're hiding, the girls are hiding, and I come in the door, and Jennifer gives me the look. You know, I say hi to her, and she kind of gives me the look or the wink, and it's like, I know what she means, like the kids are hiding. I'm like, Jalen and Colin, Kira and Macy, where are you guys? And I can usually see a head, you know, like behind the couch or something. I kind of know where they are, but I'm just having fun with them. Like, where'd you guys go? And then I'll go over there and I'll tickle them and I'll wrestle with them a little bit. But you know what? One of their favorite spots to hide is behind the chair right by the front door by that window. And what they'll do sometimes is they'll sit on that curtain, they'll lean on it, they'll pull on it. Maybe they'll have friends over and they'll be wrestling around and they'll pull on that thing. And you know what happened? It just came right out of the wall one day. And it still was attached, but it was hanging. And it looked horrible. And I was like, man, I got to fix it. And so I got my tools out, and I got up there. And it's like when you're doing a job, it's okay because, I mean, you see, it's work, but you see the progress. But when you got to redo a job that you already did, it's like, that's no fun. And so I'm up there, and I'm fixing it, and I'm trying to get it to stay. And I get it up there and move it over a little bit. And you know, weeks go by, and you know, they're playing, they're wrestling, they're hanging out around the drapes, and someone falls into it or pulls on it, and it gets pulled out again. Hey, Dad! There's times you love that, and then there's times you hate that, right? Hey, Dad! Guess what? Can you fix this thing, this mess we made? And so I come and I get my tools out, and I fix it and put it back up there, and you know, weeks go by, months go by. Hey, Dad, can you fix it? Like, guys, stay away from the drapes. All right, come on, just don't get around the drapes. Come on. And like weeks go by. Dad, it fell again. It wasn't us. It was little sister. You know. And I'm fixing this thing. I'm telling you, I've probably fixed it. You can ask Jennifer. 5, 6, 7, maybe more times I've fixed this specific spot. And it's like, and you know what I realized over time is that just the screw itself was enough. It could pull out of the sheetrock, out of the drywall. But they have, and I've used these before, they have anchors. You ever seen the anchors? And you screw these anchors in there, they're a little thick, and they go in there, and it creates a base so that when you put the screw in the anchor, it can hold it. That screw is going to keep falling out all day. But you need an anchor. You need something to kind of hold it in place. And there's some pictures and mirrors that you would hang on your wall that are so heavy that if you were to hold it up by a nail or a screw, it's gonna fall right down to the ground. But you need an anchor to keep it steady. You need an anchor to hold it in place. And for you and I, our anchor when it comes to decision making, the thing that steadies us, that helps us when the storms of life are blowing on us, it's this question. It's this very important reframing of how we think. It's this very important question. The question is this: God, what is it that you want of me? God, what is it that you want me to do? And what we instead do, the thing that gets us in problems and the things that cause our life to fall around us and to shake and to have problems, is that we instead ask a different question. We say, well, what do I want to do? And we won't maybe say it just like that, but really, when we wake up in an average day, it's like, what do I feel like doing? What do I want to do today? Instead of, God, what do you want me to do? It's what do I want to do? And if you could change one thing in your life, one question, one framing of one question that would change everything, I think that question could be, God, what is it that you want in this situation, in this moment, in me? God, what is it that you want me to do? We're so good about asking other questions that excuse us and exempt us out of God's blessing. You know, as author Randy Alcorn, who said, Satan's greatest victories and our biggest defeats come when he gets us to ask the question, should I choose what God commands me, or should I do what's best for me? You know, he says that question itself, that it's the problem. What does God want from me, or what's best for me? And he says we'll never consistently choose what God wants from us until we reframe that question to say, God, what is it that you want me to do? Because I know that that's best for me. And you'll never choose what God wants for you until you realize that when you choose to follow God's plan, that's always best for you. Always, every time. And really, if you break it down, in your heart, there is a part of you that believes that if you do what you want to do, that will go better for you. And that's why you want to do it. And when that comes up against God's will for your life, God's plan for your life, what he's asking of you, he's calling you to take a step, and you say, well, I want to do this because this seems like this would feel better and be better in my life, but God's calling me to do this. And the fact that you're debating this, like that if I do what I want, that might go better, that shows that we don't understand yet, that we don't trust, that we don't fully have faith that God's way is always best. And if you would come to learn that, what you'll learn that in time as you follow God, you realize that every time I've said yes to Jesus, every time I've followed him, even if it was hard, it always ended up better for me in the end. Even if the road was marked with pain. I mean, Jesus, his path was marked with pain, but now forever. I mean, the King of all kings, and we celebrate the cross. We celebrate Jesus' life and death and resurrection, and millions upon millions of people all over planet Earth celebrating this event that was marked by pain. But he did what the Father willed, and it turned out way better. Way better. See, here's a lesson for all of us. When we get to a crossroads, we learn to ask, God, what is it that you want? Let me wrap up this part of the story, and we'll finish off the story next week. But Jonah chapter 1 and verse 4, he runs from God. He gets on this ship headed away from Nineveh, and it says the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. So the Lord sent this wind. Such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. Their lives were in danger. And it says all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went down to him and said, how can you sleep? Get up, call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So God allowed this storm to come. He caused it. He allowed the lot to fall towards Jonah. This violent storm was in the Mediterranean Sea where they were, was a part of God's will and what he was allowing. Why? Here's the lesson, the final lesson in your notes. You cannot abandon God's path and not expect pain. You can't. You can't abandon God's path and not expect consequence, to not expect pain. See, Joseph paid on the front end, but he would pay a lot more on the back end because he was running from God. God had something he wanted to do in his life, and he was pushing God away, and he started experiencing pain. Do you remember maybe growing up, going out into the woods? Maybe you lived in a place that had maybe up north or somewhere where there was a lot of trees and nature or woods, and you would go out into the woods and you would hike down these trails. But then you would, see something out in the distance that was off the trail, and you thought, man, I'm going to go explore. I'm going to go check that out. And you would go and you'd walk through the woods, and it was so fun as you were jumping over logs and climbing up trees and climbing over rocks. And, you get back to the trail and you make your way home, and then a day or two later, you're around the house and you realize, man, my leg is itching. I got something on my leg, and you're itching, and man, it's on my other leg too, and it's on my arm, and it's getting red, and eventually it's getting all pussy, and you're scratching. You're like, what is that? And you're just a little kid, and you don't know, and you go ask somebody, you're like, man, I've been scratching and itching, and they first look at you like, something's real wrong. They're like, are you okay? And then they say, what happened? What did you do? And you're like, I don't know. I was just out in the woods hiking. And they're like, oh, I know what that is. You're out in the woods, and you're like, yeah, I was. And they're like, that's poison ivy. You're like, poison ivy, what's that? And they're like, man, it's this 3-leaf plant, and if you get it on you, man, it's going to cause you to itch. And you're like, yeah, I'm itching. And then you're so happy because they go to the store and they come back with some cream, and mom or dad or whoever, they gave you some cream, and you put this white paste all over your body. And it temporarily, the key word is temporarily, eases the itch, right? And you go to school and you got the white stuff all over your face and your legs and your arm, and you're so embarrassed, it's horrible. But the itch doesn't really go away. You're still itching, here and there, and it's getting under your fingernails, and so everywhere you touch, it's getting all over your body, and it's spreading. And then maybe you have what I had when I was a kid. I just couldn't get rid of it because I kept itching, and I had to eventually go to the doctor, and they had to give me a shot, and I hated getting shots. And they had to give me a steroid shot so that the poison ivy would actually go away. But then when that happens, you know what? You learn. Because the next time you're out in the woods, you're running down the path, and you're like, oh, that's cool. What is that over there? I'm going to go. And you start to step out the path, and not that you don't go over there, but you're like, is that a 3-leaf plant? And you're looking at it, you're like, I can't tell if it's got 4 leaves or 3 leaves. I'm just going to be safe. And you're like, woo! And you're like, all right, whoa, watch out for that one. And you're just kind of dancing through the woods because you don't want to step on the 3-leaf plant, because if you do, you're going to be doing this thing again. You don't want to do that. They all feel pain. And so you avoid anything that you think is going to lead to the... And so God sometimes is kind that when we leave the path, he allows consequences to happen. He allows pain to happen so that we will know that his path is better. And Jonah, he leaves God's path, and you can't leave God's path without experiencing pain. And this ship is being broken up. This storm is coming in, these waves, and they're saying, what's going on? And they cast lots, and it falls towards Jonah. Jonah's the reason. He's the problem. And he knows it. Jonah knows in his heart he's running from his God, the one true God, and he's trying to do his own thing. What's best for me was not really what was best for him. And if you in your life know that God's stirring in you something, and he's saying, I want you to commit more to me. I want you to follow me. I want you to live more for me. This is not about just attending church or calling yourself a Christian. This is about you really engaging and following me and living for me and praying and knowing my word and being a genuine follower of Christ. I'm calling you to something more. And you know what? If you're pulling back, I'm just saying, like, what's best for you is to say, yes, God, whatever it is. And only you know. Jonah knew what God was calling him to do. And that's all he was responsible for. He ran from it because he didn't think it was in his best interest. But God, whatever it is he's calling you into, whatever he's wanting you to do in your life, it's always in your best interest. You have one responsibility: to trust and obey. You trust God and you obey and you follow him and you see God's blessing and you see God work in your life. Next time you're at that crossroads, I'm going to challenge you to ask one question. God, what do you want me to do? Whatever it is, the answer is yes. Right on?
Thank you for joining us at Church Experience Online. Please don't forget to check out our website if you would like to get more connected, learn more, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially by giving online. You're now going to hear an original Church Experience worship song. We hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned today.